Hello and welcome everyone to this YouTube video breaking down an alternative rock mix. I am joined by my friend and intern Alex here, and we're going to be breaking down the mix for a song called Pixie Girl by the Shoals, a new up-and-coming group in Central New York. We're going to break this down just to dig into some of the details, and we're going to deconstruct the song mix just so we can see what happened inside the song, inside the production, what took the rough tracks, the raw tracks, and turn them into the finished product, and so forth. Hopefully this can be helpful for anyone else who's making a song or who's interested in producing a song or writing a song. This is a song called Pixie Girl by the Shoals, as you can see on the screen, and I will put a link in the description for different places that you can hear the track. It's a song that I'm super proud of, and I know the band is super happy with, that just came out really good. It's well produced in a cool way, and it's not overproduced, I would find. It's just very tastefully put together. Let's dig in. Alright, so in this mix breakdown, we are using Pro Tools. That's just the digital audio workstation that I use to work on songs, and I mix and master in Pro Tools. Let me play you a sampling from the song so you can hear what we're working with first.
Waking up to a pixie girl with flowers up on the wall. From the summer we ran from church to catch a film at the mall. She said you'll be sleeping for a long time, babe. I've been rambling on about you. I've been rambling on about
So as you can see, this is a pretty cool song. It's got a really fun but old school kind of vibe, and it's super catchy. That's why I thought that this would be a cool topic of discussion for this video. And the song came out great, so that's another reason why this is just a fun song to look behind the scenes on. Let's take a listen to the drums. We'll zone right in on that. Take a listen to the raw drums on this chorus before processing. They're not bad, I suppose, but they're a little sterile. Now let's check out the processed drums. As you can tell, there's a huge improvement. They sound way more professional. Let's dig into some of the details of what makes the drums pop and sound more pro in this way. So for the kick drum here, I record typically the kick drum with two microphones. So there's a Shure Beta 91 on the inside of the kick, and then there's a knockoff Fat 47 by Warm Audio on the outside. And then I also used this plugin here by Waves Factory to trigger a sub-kick style microphone. That provided a lot of low end here. Let's check out the three different microphones. Here's the kick inside. As you can tell, this provides a lot of the attack of the bass drum. Next, let's check out the outside mic. This mic provided a lot of the body of the bass drum, and you did hear both with the sub-kick blended underneath. Now I'll show you an example with the sub-kick trigger and without. This is with the sub-kick trigger. and this is without. Now, if you're listening on your cell phone or a very small pair of speakers, you might not be able to tell the difference. But on my system, the difference is huge. The kick with the sub-kick trigger engaged has so much more low end and foundation for the drum set. Now let's check out what we're using to process the kick drum as a whole. First, there's an equalizer here that's adding high end to the kick drum to help it cut, and then also cutting some of the muddy, boxy frequencies in the 500 range. And then actually there's a little boost here too that's adding just a tiny little bit at 185 just to add a little bit more body to the kick. Take a listen to this EQ plugin before and after. And after. That EQ honestly makes a pretty big difference. I'm kind of blown away. I really like how it sounds on there. Next, I have a little more equalization happening on this parametric EQ. It looks like a similar thing, adding a little bit of thump on the low end, but then cutting some of the places where it might be muddy. I'd be willing to bet that this was something that was maybe added later in the process as I was figuring out the mix more and more. And last but not least, one of my favorite compressors is on the kick drum, the distressor. It's a slow attack and a fast release, which means that it's going to be kind of a punchy sound for the drum. Let's listen to a before and after without the distressor and with the distressor. Honestly, that was a way bigger difference than I thought it would be. I feel like the kick is just so much more consistent and in your face with the distressor on. That's one of the reasons why it's one of my favorites. And last but not least, I didn't think I had any triggering going on the drum set, but apparently I did trigger a little bit of kick into the sound of the drums. As you can see here, the mix is only at 30%, so it's just adding a little bit underneath of what's already there. Let's take a listen to before and after the kick trigger being engaged. This one is maybe a little more subtle than some of the other changes that happen to the kick drum, but I honestly really like it. It provides a little consistency and just makes the kick feel that much more solid. Let's check out the snare drum. The first plugin that I have on my snare channel is actually a delay plugin that is designed for delay compensation. And the reason that this is here is because something that's super important with drums is phase. Let me show you what I mean. When you zoom in on the tracks and really look at those sine waves and what's going on in the waveforms of the tracks, here, let me lower this a little bit. You can see something very interesting going on, and it makes total sense. Notice how the snare top, snare bottom are not perfectly aligned. And then take that a step further, you can see here, boom, the snare hit on the overheads is over here. What does this mean? Well, really what it means is that the drums, at least according to where the microphones are positioned, are not perfectly 100% aligned with each other. And that's why I actually use a delay compensation plugin to delay the top and the bottom typically. And maybe I didn't, I just did them both on this. But you delay that to line up as close as possible with overheads. And now this isn't something that you're going to hear a difference in, say, the timing. Like you're not going to hear the snare like all of a sudden is like timed different necessarily because it's so small of a difference, but you will hear a difference in tone. This change will add low end into the snare, at least when mixed together with the overheads that was missing because they weren't out of alignment in phase terms. So that's the first plugin on the chain, and I'll demonstrate that a little more once we have the overheads in. Next, like the kick drum, is an SSL channel strip doing EQ and probably a little bit of compression based on how it looks. Let's check it out, before and after. Now this actually wasn't compressing any, at least it's not hitting the gain reduction meter, but it is adding a little bit of top end, so you can hear those snares come out a little bit of crack around 2.5K, adding a little crack in the high mids, trying to be vague here so it's easy to understand. And then again, it's cutting out a little bit of like where it might be kind of honky, and that's around the 700 range. That's what's going on this EQ. Next in the chain, we have another distressor. I'm imagining that we're going to like this kind of like we did on the kick drum. So it's compressing the snare in a way, actually the same in attack and release speeds as the kick, but it's compressing in a way where the attack is slow enough where it's letting the punch of the drum come through. And I would guess, just like the kick drum, it's going to make the sound and tone quality be more consistent. Let's take a listen again, before and after. As you can hear, the volume level definitely came up a little bit as well, but it just sounds so much more consistently thwacky. I don't know if there's a better way to describe it. The tone quality of the hits and the way it just keeps it kind of in the same place consistently, which is kind of nice. Again, it's not exactly the same. We're not using samples here. It's a real drum, but it's just kind of keeping the snare in the pocket, not in a rhythm way, but in a volume way, in a level way. And last but not least, there's an EQ on here. And again, this is just a little bit extra tone shaping. It looks like we're using dynamic EQ a little bit on the low mids and boosting some of the high end. I don't know that I'll bore you with playing that one before and after. Let's get back to the overheads and listen to the difference with the delay compensation plugin in and out. So here's our processed overhead microphone channel. And this is with our snare in without the adjuster plugin. And now here is with the delay compensation added for phase alignment. Again, this is something I think you would hear on most systems. On my system, it's wildly different. The one with the time alignment with the delay compensation in there for phase has so much more body and low end to it. Honestly, without it there, I would hate this snare drum. It just is missing something. It just doesn't sound right to me. Why don't I play it again and I'll pull it in and out this time as it's playing, and I'll play it a little bit longer. Honestly, if I had to pick one thing about this drum mix that was the secret sauce, based on just what I'm hearing right now, it would be that, because that drastically changes the tone of the snare drum. I'm kind of blown away right now. I'm patting myself on the back from the past. My current self is like, wow, good job. But yeah, that's just something you have to be really cautious of when you're doing drum mixing, is the phase between all the different microphones. There's so many microphones, and you have to have them working together, not against each other. And sometimes that means phase alignment for tone. Let's check out what's on the overhead channels. I should have warned you up front that the drums are probably going to be the longest part of this video, just because drum mixing is that much more complicated and involved than mixing the other parts of the song. But I digress. Here's the overheads. First, we have a parametric EQ on the channel that looks like it's just adding a little bit of the low mids that were probably missing from the recording, cutting a little bit of the honky part of the mids around 700. It's interesting that we're cutting a lot there on these drums. And then just boosting a little bit of high end just to give a little bit of shimmer to the cymbals. Next, we have Soothe 2, which is a very unique plugin. It's a frequency, the best way to describe it would be as a frequency resonance suppressor, which is weird, but I guess the simple way of explaining it is more or less it finds odd resonances and harsh things and weird oddities and compresses it out of the track. This plugin would be a great plugin to hear a before and after. Let's check it out. Now this plugin is subtle, but I hear it the most on the crash cymbals. It really is just pulling out some of the harsh frequencies on the crashes. And by pulling out the harsh spots, it actually makes the cymbal sound sweeter just in general. I really like it. It has a brilliant tone to it once you remove all the harsh stuff going on in the cymbals. It makes that cymbal just sound really pretty. And last but not least, there's another EQ with another cut. Honestly, the only reason that's probably there like that is because I probably figured this cut out in a later iteration of the mix, meaning that mix 1 and 2, etc. might have only had the first two plugins, but then as I was working on it at a later date, I thought it needed an extra cut. This cut could have occurred on the first one, but it's just on a second one because I added it later. Let's check out the toms. Like the snare drum, the first plugin on the toms is the delay compensation plugin. It's called Time Adjuster. Just like the snare, this is in an attempt to get the phase on the toms really good so that we can get the most tone out of the drum as possible. Next is an SSL channel strip plugin. This is being used for EQ, gate, and probably a little bit of compression, although I haven't played it today. I'm sure it'll compress a little bit. I'm going to play this in a before and after, just like we've been doing, to show you what it's really doing. But keep in mind, it's doing three things. There's going to be a tone difference, at least a little bit, because the high end is being boosted here. It's adding a gate, which means that that's going to attempt to remove some of the parts where the drum is not being hit. And then the compression is an attempt to make the hits a little more consistent, maybe a little more punchy. Let's check out a before and after on the rack tom number 1. And now here is the processed drum. So really what I'm hearing is it's adding a little bit of top end like attack, probably from the EQ, but then also the gate is just bringing out the tom drum like when it needs to be heard, and then lowering that channel when we don't need all the bleed on that microphone. Basically how tom mics work is that they're on the tom drums, but consider this fact that the tom only really gets hit sometimes. So the gate is an attempt to have that microphone be active when the tom drum gets hit, and then have it be lower or gone completely when it's not being used. Last but not least, there's a little bit more EQ going on the tom. I must have wanted to get a little bit more attack and a little bit more low end on this drum, and to cut a little bit of the mids. Sometimes the mids on drums can get kind of like papery sounding. Let's do a before and after on this one as well. Honestly, I think this one could have gone either way stylistically. I think that the mids weren't bad, but I think for this song we just wanted probably a little more of a more modern tom sound and just get a little more like fatness and low end out of it. And that's why this choice was made. So next, on the floor tom, it starts the same way as the snare and the rack tom started. There's a delay compensation plugin on there for phase. I'm not going to play that because we already heard the big difference that made on the snare drum. But then, it's just like the rack tom. We have an SSL channel strip with different boosts and cuts than what was going on the rack tom. And different gate settings, of course, different compression settings, and an EQ. It looks like let's go back to the channel strip. On the channel strip, there was a little bit of top end added. Think stick attack, think that kind of thing. That's what you're going to get there. There was a cut in the high mids. I don't know why. I must have just thought it sounded good. Can't think of a generality for that one right now. And then that's it on the EQ. And then this equalizer, this parametric EQ, looks like there was a boost in the lows, some cuts in the mids, and a little bit of top. So kind of a similar thing going on, but we added the low end here. Let me play you a before and after of both EQs for the floor tom. Wow, it really sounds like a bass drop or something once the processing's in there. Now remember, it's all in context too, so we're not hearing it within the overhead microphones right now. That might have been what it needed in context with the overheads and the room mics to really make it pop. I'm assuming that's why it sounds so low-endy, but I love it. It sounds great. Next is the hi-hat microphone. I probably won't do as much before and after on this one, but more or less there's a low-pass filter to roll off all the really low-end stuff because we're not looking for sub-frequencies from the hi-hat. And secondly, there was this mag EQ added to add a little bit of sparkle to the hi-hats. It's very subtle. Next, let's check out the room mics. So at first it starts with the EQ, and I'm actually kind of surprised. I don't remember there being this much on there. And it seems like a lot of processing, but it must have just sounded best this way. Basically, it looks like there's a dynamic cut. This must be probably for some kind of resonance in the kick drum. And then I would bet that these three cuts in the center are for the room tone, just to kind of cut some of the mids. It probably felt a little too mid-heavy, a little honky. So just trying to, in an attempt to bring out the fullness of the room, i.e. the low end and the high end. That's what these cuts are for. And then this cut is a dynamic cut, and it's probably there to reduce some of the high end harshness that might come in on the crash cymbals. This is Soothe 2, and it's going to be kind of doing the same thing it did on the overheads, which is just taking out some of the harsh frequencies. Again, think of those crashes. They don't always naturally sound super sweet and brilliant. They often do have some harsh things going on in them, and this is going to pull out some of that harshness. And last but not least on the room mics is an SSL bus compressor. It's just being used to compress the drums a little bit and provide a little bit of extra energy into the track. Before we move on to percussion, let's just listen to those drums isolated one more time just for a little bit so we can take it in. All right, let's check out the percussion in this track. So in this song, there's a shaker track and a tambourine track. It looks like they weren't processed a ton, but let's consider this moment to think about the production aspect that this is adding. During the choruses, there's a shaker, and during the choruses, there's a tambourine, but it looks like the tambourine also comes in and out in other spots as well. Let me solo these so you can hear what's going on. So that's just providing a little bit of extra sauce, for lack of a better word, in the choruses and a little bit of extra texture. I like to think of percussion often as like ear candy. There's like little extra things happening that are just making this chorus pop, and that includes the tambourine and the shaker. There's a little bit of EQ on the shaker, and a little bit of compression on both just to even them out. But that's most of what's going on with the percussion tracks. In verse 2, the tambourine comes in and hits with the snare. Check it out.
In and out of line, nothing but a taste to numb from a trip gone on this night.
And then in the bridge, it speeds up. Check it out.
Waking up to a
It just kind of keeps things plugging along and adds like that shimmer, shiny sound to the top of the track that we all know and love. We all love tambourine. Just admit it. You just don't know that it's your favorite instrument. All right, let's check out what's going on with the bass. All right, so the bass guitar is pretty standard, more or less. I don't think it's certainly not as complicated as the drums were. But let's take a listen to the ISO bass for a second. It's a good bass tone. I'll show you how we got it, because honestly, this one's really in the box. We plug the bass directly into the computer. I often like doing this, honestly. I found it to be near equivalent to miking an amp. But what I do is I end up using an amp on the computer, a software amplifier. Let me show you. So this is Guitar Rig. I often use this for bass tones. And we're using Bass Pro. Okay, buddy. It looks exactly like an Ampeg SVT4. That's basically what it is. And then there's a cabinet simulator as well. See, this is the microphone it's using based on an Earthworks and the cone positioning, etc. I prefer this, honestly, so much more than just going straight in the computer and not using an amplifier. I just find it's, I don't know, maybe it's the fact that I played bass live before and I can just totally respect like the thunder you bring. And I think you only get that from an amplifier. When you plug right in, it sounds okay, but it's not the same. Even when you do play in a bigger venue with a sub, you can kind of get it, but it's just something about an amp. It just has a tone, and we were really after that. I'm almost always after that, but I definitely think these guys were after it. So we used this plugin to achieve that Ampeg tone. Next, I put an EQ on the channel, and it looks like it's pretty subtle for the most part, although this cut's pretty big. There's a couple small cuts, like trying to attempt to make the low mids a little bit more consistent and just even smooth things out. And then there's this big cut here, nearly 10 dB at around 300, just under 300 hertz. That would just be a cut that would just attempt to clean up the bass tone from any mud. Because we want a solid foundation. We want a lot of low end, but we don't really want it to be muddy either. So honestly, that's what this is doing. This is going to be cleaning up a little bit of that mud. Again, like I mentioned, you want to have a nice clean foundation in the bass, and then you actually want to have a good top end to some degree, and that's what this Saturn plugin is doing. I do this all the time. We all, as we mix, we find things we like, and we do them over and over again. To some degree, at least. This plugin is actually saturating the bass, but only above a certain line. So only above 231 hertz. It's actually adding quite a bit of saturation to the bass guitar. Let me play you a before and after, not of the dry guitar without the amplifier, but with the EQ and the saturation. So you can hear what really changed by adding some processing to the bass. So what you're really hearing are differences that probably will make the most difference in context of the whole track, because you're hearing a lot more of the bass guitar, the part that's going to cut through the mix in the high end, coming through from the saturation. And then, of course, you're hearing a little less of the muddy frequencies from the EQ. But overall, you're getting a bass that's a little more bold and will kind of like cut through what's going on in the rest of the song. Let's check out some of the rhythm guitars. Actually, it looks like not a ton is happening with the electric guitars, which is kind of cool. It means it was done really well right from the get-go. Jack is one of the guitar players' names, and I think you could argue he was the main rhythm player in the group. His tone was great. We mic'd up a little Fender with a ribbon mic, made sure it was positioned just right, and that's kind of the goal with electric guitars. I find if you're doing a lot of post-production on electric guitars, you're usually trying to fix a mistake in the recording process. It looks like we recorded it right, which is super cool. Let's check out his tones. They're just good tones, and we didn't want to screw them up. So let's see what I added in the mix. I don't think it's going to be too crazy. Okay. It's a little crazier than I thought it would be, but it's not that crazy considering it's an electric guitar. So there's a low roll off. They call it a high pass filter because the highs are passing through. And it's a little under 100 hertz. This is pretty common practice for electric guitars because there's usually not a lot being added that's useful down that low. Same with the top end. With electric guitars, most of what's up here above like 11,000, 13,000 is just noise and hiss and stuff. So you can put these filters in to taste, but you can bank on them being okay being there on most electric guitars. All the usable stuff is really within this range here. And then next, it really just looks like there were a couple cuts in the mids to clean things up a little bit. I'd be willing to bet that I listened to this on my speaker's alternate setting that emulates smaller cube speakers to just kind of clean up where it needed to be cleaned up. And then this vitamin plugin was used to add a little bit of mid. Electric guitars really cut in the mid-range, and it's important to have mid-range. It really is what makes it kind of pop out of the speakers. It's like the lifeblood of an electric guitar is the mids. Now, don't get me wrong, you can get cool tones that are more scooped, but as far as mixing goes, when you really need it to pop out, you're sure to add a little bit of mid, and that'll accomplish it. Let's check out an A/B just with these two processors, before and after. It's a subtle change, but I think it's an important change. I think the electric just kind of became a little more punchy and in your face with that in a way that it probably needed in the context of the whole song to make the electric really drive. We were kind of after like a Young the Giant type sound, and I think when referencing, we noticed that the guitars have a little bit more edge on some other styles, stuff like that. So we decided, boom, let's add a little more. Let's check out the acoustic guitar. I honestly forgot that this song even had acoustic guitar, but that's kind of what I was talking about before. The acoustic guitar in this song is really just ear candy. Let's check out what the acoustic guitar is even doing. To To be 100% honest, I think there is a little bit of like tambourine bleed in there or something. I don't know if they were messing around with the tambourine right near the door or in the next room, but you do hear. I wasn't there that day when they did the acoustic, but I don't think it's an issue. It doesn't mess with the song. The song's already released, so clearly it's not a problem. But let's check out what's on the acoustic guitar. A little bit of EQ in the low end, the mids, the top end. Another EQ. I like to use this one for a little bit of the tone it brings to the top end. So this is adding a little shimmer, and then compression, which often gets added to things. The acoustic in this arrangement is really just a little bit of ear candy to make the choruses in certain sections pop. Let me play you it in context so you can get a better idea.
I'm waking up to a Pixie girl. The flowers up on the wall. From the summer we ran from church to catch a film at the mall. She said you've been sleeping for a...
As you can hear, the acoustic guitar isn't really a feature on this song, but it is a super nice little addition that just kind of provides a little bit of interest in tone quality, I guess I would say. You just hear the doo-doo-doo-doo, like on the sides. You're just getting a little bit of an interesting like texture that's being added to it. I think it's a good add. That's my piece on ear candy, I guess. Let's check out the trumpets. The processing for the trumpets has a tuner on each one, just to slap him right in the pocket in terms of his tuning. Then there's a little bit of compression on each one because every take is going to be a little different. The best way to compress it would be to start by compressing every single take at least a little bit to try and even things out, and then we'll compress the group together later. Let's look at the group processing for the trumpets. There's an EQ rolling off a lot of the low end. Again, trumpet is not a bass instrument. We don't need a ton of like sub frequencies going on down there. And then we have some high mid cuts that are just kind of cleaning things up, probably providing a lot more space for the vocal and just cleaning up the sound of the trumpets. Then we have some compression on the group, just kind of gluing the ensemble, our faux ensemble, together. The reason we had him do different parts was so he could do harmony, but then also we had him double it so it might sound like a group of trumpets, all played by one trumpet player. This compressor is there to glue the ensemble together and kind of squish it into one thing, if that makes sense. We don't want it to sound like 6 individual trumpets. We want it to sound like a group of 6 trumpeters. This is just an attempt to do that and also to even everything out. Next, again, is Soothe 2, like we used on the drums. This is in an attempt to smooth things out that might be harsh. And then a limiter. This is just a super aggressive compressor that's going to get used again to even things out and take off some of the really big spikes. Let's listen to the trumpets with and without processing. They sounded great before, and they sound even better after. I think it'd be worth noting there is some reverb on there too. It's just being sent to our main reverb send in the session, and that is this plate reverb by Slate Digital, Verb Suites Classic. It looks like on the whole session there is a just under 2-second plate reverb being used, and that's not being used on everything. At least equally, I should say. It is probably mostly on the snare drum, maybe the toms, the vocals, and the trumpets. Anything that we felt needed that amount of space and texture to it. So the trumpets definitely have some reverb as well. Next, we have the trumpet solo in the song. This is honestly probably one of the more fun things, mix-wise, going on in the song. I think this is where I got a little freaky with it, just for fun. Let's go through the chain. There's a little bit of tuning. Again, like, it's a wind instrument. It's not always perfectly in tune. Just tuned it a little bit, really slow, to kind of try and make it go right in the pocket. Next, I used the UAD Avalon plugin. I don't really know why. I guess I was feeling saucy that day. But this is emulating a tube microphone preamp, and it's processing it in a few ways. There's some compression going on and EQ. So it looks like there's some huge boosts in the low end just to try and thicken up the trumpet, while there's a little cut in the high mids to smooth it out, and then some treble added for some nice brightness in tone. Then we have an EQ here, just, again, a little more harshness to cut out. And this is where things get interesting. So there's a phaser. This is a Avid plugin, I want to say. Like, it comes stock with Pro Tools if you're a subscriber. But it's based after the MXR Phase 90 pedal. It's a little orange guitar pedal. It's super iconic. I know Eddie Van Halen kind of helped make it famous. But you can hear it when you listen to the solo trumpet. There's like some phase going on. It sounds kind of cool. Next, Saturn. I think I just was clicking through presets and found weird ones. This one's doing all kinds of weird envelopey stuff, but it's blended in at 35%. So it's probably honestly doing kind of some funky synth action type stuff. Next, some delay. Interesting. 16th note triplet. Again, it must have just sounded the best. I'm trusting myself on this one. And then a plate reverb just to add a little more space to it even. Let's listen to the trumpet solo, dry and then affected. I think it's pretty cool. I'm going to play it for you in context of the song as well, just because, I don't know, I think having listened to this song, I think this, when I was mixing it, I thought this was the moment to kind of like freak it a little bit. I didn't think that they were so traditional with their tones that it should just be like a normal sounding trumpet. So that's why there's a little bit of funky stuff going on, whether it be the phaser, the saturation thing, the delays, the reverbs. Like, that's why I think that was my thought process with this trumpet solo, was just, it really should kind of be bold in a weird way, in a more modern way, doesn't have to be just so plain. Let's take a listen in context to the trumpet solo.
Waking up to a Pixie girl.
And honestly, it's soloed. It sounds like there's a ton of stuff on it, but in context, it doesn't sound that crazy, which is a good win-win. We don't, we're not out here trying to just change songs. We're just trying to make them sound good. So it's good to know in context, it just sounds like a trumpet, but it sounds like it's got all this crazy stuff going on in a cool way. Let's check out the keys. So it looks like we added organ on this song. I honestly forgot the organ was there. This is just another piece of ear candy, which is my favorite kind of candy. Well, I don't know. Anyway, I digress. There's an organ on this song and a little bit of EQ, carving out a little space. Remember, at this point now, there's trumpets, guitars, keys in the form of an organ, and vocals that are all going to be competing for the high mids for clarity in that section. I can only guess and assume that this is why the organ has cuts here. We're creating space for these other instruments. It probably, actually, I remember now, when going through the mix, like, I remember listening and being like, that sounds okay. And then finally going through and getting a little more aggressive with the high mids, and it finally all kind of, oh wow, now it sounds legit. Because things were kind of, they call it frequency masking. Things were kind of like on top of each other, not in terms of the arrangement, but just in terms of the tone. So that's what these cuts are for. And then Imager plugin by Waves, S1 Imager. I don't use this one a ton, but sometimes I'll grab it just to spread things out. So it just takes the organ from here and just kind of spreads it out a little bit, makes our mix sound a little bit bigger in the width department. Let's take a listen to what the organ is adding to the arrangement. So what it's really doing is adding like a bed underneath the music in like a bright way, not in like a synth paddy type way. It's going to brighten up the track in a fun way, just based on the tone that they picked. And I think the best way to really evaluate it is for me to play it in context, and I'll mute it in and out so you can hear what it's really adding to the song.
Waking up to a Pixie girl, flowers up on the wall. From the summer we ran from church to catch a film at the mall. She said you've been sleeping for a long time, babe. I've been rambling on about you.
I like it in there a lot. I think it plays a big role, but it's one of those things that, like, yeah, is it necessarily vital to the song? Like, could you walk away from the song with the same takeaway without the organ? Sure. But again, we're in the ear candy department, and that's really what it's doing really well. I definitely like it better when it's in there. It just makes everything feel really full in a nice way. So I think the organ was a nice addition production-wise to this song. Let's check out the vocals. I think this is the last piece. So as far as vocals go, I usually do a lot of the main processing in a bus. As you can see, there are a few different tracks. There's a double track here. There's a main track. There's a choir bus. I used the choir plugin to try and make the outro a little bit bigger. There's this doubler plugin that's getting used in spots. Let's see. Oh, it looks like the whole song, there's a little bit of doubler added in, nope, yeah, the entire song, a little bit of doubler. And then there is an actual double track in certain parts of the song. I think we cut it up, so it isn't in the whole verses or anything like that. There's a reverse reverb swallow. This is kind of cool. I can show you that in a second. And then there's 2 harmony tracks. Let's start with this reverse track. This is what starts the whole song. Check this out. I'm not going to play it for you again. You can rewind the video if you need to. But basically, how you make these, and I know Mikey, my partner at the studio, did this. You take a little clip of the beginning of the first line, and you make a selection here. You would click here and go to reverb, and you print the clip as just reverb and then reverse it. So what you're hearing is a reverb tail from this line backwards leading into it. I'll play it for you one more time. I won't be so snooty. That's a little bit of studio magic that got added to this track while we were in the studio producing it. But as far as the vocals go, let's go through the actual processing on the bus. We have a de-esser on the vocals that attempts to lower the S's. Sometimes in recordings, the S's can stand out. I'm emphasizing it now to make a point. But this plugin compresses the range where the S's are when they come in to lower the S's. Next, we have Soothe 2, which attempts to remove harsh frequencies and pull them out. This is my standard vocal chain, more or less. There's a few changes. So I have another video on processing vocals for more in-depth detail, check out that video. I'll try and remember to link it in the description. If not, it's on my channel. Then there's an equalizer on his vocals. So we're doing a dynamic cut in the low mids, and then some mid cuts, and then a high boost. Again, a lot of the EQ decision making, I can explain my way through all of it, but at the same time, it's different for everything. So this just is what sounds right for his voice to me and got client approved. It's that combination, right? I thought it sounded good, and then the client liked it. That's why it's on there. I would imagine that maybe there was some just honky stuff that needed to be cleared up. Next is a distressor compressor. One of my faves. For vocals, I think I like it for a different reason than on the drums. I just think it's very transparent and brings things up front. Then an 1176, probably hitting a few dB. Again, more compression. You got to compress stuff, especially vocals. You want to be able to hear every little word. Next, we have a Neve EQ plugin. I know why I used this because it's the main reason I ever put it on vocals. Usually use this to add a little bit of mids. It's also nice on guitars, but sometimes this just really, in a really tasteful way, just pushes the vocals to the front and makes them feel a little bit more aggressive. That sounds like a good move for this song because Gary has like a smooth, buttery voice, and we probably just needed to push it a little bit. So a little boost at 1.8 kilohertz. Again, an EQ, that's interesting. This probably was added later because why else would it be later in the chain? Just added a few more cuts to try and smooth things out. Last on the chain, that is, there is a eighth note delay that's just creating a little bit of interest. Let me play the vocals a little bit with this because this is an interesting trick. Let's check out the delay here.
Waking up to a pixie girl and flowers up on the wall.
Now let's check it out without the delay.
Waking up to a pixie girl and flowers up on the wall.
He sounds great without the delay, but the delay is just adding like some nice texture to what he's singing. And I definitely think that was a good add for his voice. It just kind of creates a vibe. Like I think part of the mixing process, especially for this song, is creating a vibe. They've kind of got this like old school sound with the clean guitars and all the seventh chords. Think way back to the 50s but it's got this old school like classic sound, I guess, but we're trying to modernize it, and I think this just kind of like leans into that in both ways, in the old school and the modernizing. And last but not least, the vocals are getting sent to our reverb that I showed earlier, and there are a few delay throws throughout the song for certain lines in verse 2. Yeah, so check this out.
Fall in and out of line with nothing but a taste to numb.
So that's just creating a little bit of interest in, it looks like mostly verse 2 and some of the parts later in the song. I find that adding a little bit of delay like that, especially in the verse, it's obviously going to create a little bit of rhythm and just some texture in the back, but then in other parts, it's going to make a larger than life sound, like in the ba-da-ba-ba-ba-da. It's just going to take it to the stratosphere. That's really what's happening. I feel like the track sounds like $1 million once the delay gets added. So anyways, why don't I give you a before and after of the vocal chain? Let's check that out. Gary, if you're watching, forgive me. I kid. It'll be tuned. My boy, great singer, Gary Carpentier. So this is without the chain stuff on the bus.
I'm waking up to a pixie girl and flowers up on the wall. From the summer we ran from church to catch a film at the mall.
So as you can hear, he did a really good job delivering these lines and creating like just a good vocal performance on this song. And we even took it a step further. I used Vocal Line. There's this plugin called Vocal Line Ultra. If it'll load, yep, there we go. And we used this to sync up the doubles to the leads just to make it nice and tight. But let's check out the vocals now with the vocal chain in all their glory.
I'm waking up to a pixie girl and flowers up on the wall. From the summer we ran from church to catch a film at the mall. She said you've been sleeping for a long time, babe. I've been rambling on about you. Hey!
It's a great vocal take, and the song sounds awesome. So I don't know what more you want than that. He killed it. This really concludes the details of going through the mix of the song Pixie Girl by the Shoals. As you can see throughout the video, there's all kinds of ear candy and fun techniques going on through the production that just make the song more interesting to listen to. This is why attention to detail, creativity, and experimentation are so important when you're producing a song. Because when you really go through this, when we went through this song and we took out certain elements or we changed this, changed that, it just didn't pop the same way. There's a lot that goes into your favorite songs that makes them great. I would encourage you to think through some of these things and maybe even implement some of the techniques that we went through today when you're working on your songs, when you're making art, when you're making anything. Just be creative, take time, and make something awesome. Thank you for watching. Please leave any comments with any questions you might have or any just comments in general you may have. And don't forget to subscribe if you're interested in more content like this. Go check out the song Pixie Girl by the Shoals on all streaming platforms, and I'll give you the payoff that you're looking for right now by playing it through the whole song on this video. Take care.
Fall in and out of love with nothing but a waste of time. In a trip on some day is mine. Sent a message high. He's looking for a taste of lonely paradise. Waking up to a Pixie girl, flowers up on the wall. From the summer we ran from church to catch a film at the mall. She said you've been sleeping for a long time, babe. I've been rambling on about you. Fall in and out of line, nothing but a taste of numb from a trip gone on. This night sent a message high. He's looking for a taste that only she can find. I'm waking up to a Pixie girl, the flowers up on the wall. From the summer we ran from church to catch a film at the mall. She said you've been sleeping for a long time, babe. I've been rambling on about you. Hey! Waking up to a Pixie girl, the flowers up on the wall. From the summer we ran from church to catch a film at the mall. She said you've been sleeping for a long time, babe. I've been rambling on about you. About
I did just remember, I did put the song in a separate session to do the final mastering. In order to hear the final master, you should really consider going and streaming the song. Take care, guys.